If you were to start sewing today, how much would it cost you? Let's talk about it. As a beginner, there are several things that you're going to need to start your sewing journey. So I'm going to pretend like I am starting my sewing journey today, right? So I'm going to go over a list of all the things that I would need in order to get started. And then I am going to calculate the total of each of those. And I'm going to be quoting this in US dollars. I will also convert it to Jamaican dollars. So for the Jamaican people out there who are watching this, you'll be able to know exactly how much that is in your mind, right? By the way, if you're new here, I'm Gabby from Sew Quaint, and on this channel, I share sewing tips and tutorials for people who want to learn how to sew their own bags and their own clothes. So if that sounds like your vibe, subscribe and hit that bell icon so you never miss an upload. I am also gonna be sharing a resource that I have today that is a list of things that you need as a beginner sewist. I have a video like this on my channel already. However, I never got into like the cost of all these things, and if you want to start sewing in 2026, you might be curious as to how much it is that things are going to cost, right? You want to know how much to put aside, how much to budget, so that way you can have enough and then get started on your sewing journey. This is available on my Patreon, by the way, if you just want to have it to print it out so that you can just have like a shopping list of sorts that will pretty much give you that guidance that you need. But first and foremost, you're going to need a sewing machine, because I'm assuming that the type of sewing you want to do involves a sewing machine. If you just want to use needle and thread, that's pretty simple, right? You just need needle, you need thread and scissors. That's pretty on the low side budget wise. Maybe you've heard that sewing is expensive, and it can be relative. It depends on what you consider to be expensive. So the first thing that you're gonna need is a sewing machine. A sewing machine can run you anywhere from 160 US dollars to 800 US dollars, depending on the brand that you go for. There are sewing machines that are as low as $160. There's this one on my Amazon storefront. I have a list of sewing supplies as well there. Let me see if I can pull it up to just show it to you guys right now. But there's a sewing machine on there from Brother that is about $160. I'm gonna go over here. All right, so this right here is my Amazon storefront, and I have a bunch of sewing tools and supplies that can come in handy for your sewing journey. So as you can see, I have a variety of sewing machines listed here. A Brother sewing machine can easily run you about $160. My first sewing machine was a Brother BM 2800, and it worked pretty fine for me, but there are a lot of things that it couldn't do. So I wish that I started with the one that I have right now, which is the Singer 4423. And I have a video here on my channel showing you, you know, like what you get with the Singer 4423 and that kind of stuff. But if I was starting over my sewing journey, I would definitely buy a Singer sewing machine. And the reason why I say that is because they are very reliable, they're easy to use, they're beginner friendly, and this one right here is in black. So if you're the type of person who likes black, you know, like this is a great option. As you can see, this is $239 though. You can basically call that about $240. And I believe the gray one actually costs less than that. Let me see. So the gray one here is $229. So we're going to go ahead and just add that to the list. We're going to just say $230. I'm going to be calculating the total, and then at the end of the video, we can go into what that total is. But up front, you're already gonna need at least $230. I must say, if you can't afford to buy a sewing machine that is brand new, you could always just go on Facebook Marketplace. People are selling sewing machines all the time on Facebook Marketplace. You could go on OfferUp, you could go on eBay. There are so many different platforms that you can check out for second hand items. You can also check out yard sales, because a lot of times people are either migrating or they're moving to somewhere else, or someone passed away. I heard of this girl once who got a sewing machine from an estate sale, and I think that's pretty cool. So if you see opportunities like that in your area, you can check them out to see if there are any sewing machines. Thrift stores also sell sewing machines. I have gone in there and saw a few sewing machines myself before, but because I already have sewing machines, I didn't get any of them. But you are able to usually buy them for hugely discounted prices, sometimes vintage sewing machines, as a matter of fact. I'm not really sure the price that you can get one of those for, but I'm just gonna keep this to like new items. So this list includes new items that you would buy from scratch. And I'm going to put it up to the level where if you really have a nice budget and you can buy all of these things, then fine. But then if you see anything that maybe you don't feel like you're going to need that, or it's out of your budget, then you can just take that off of the list. Because another important thing about starting a sewing journey is you don't have to wait until you have everything that you need before you get started. You can start before you have everything. You can start before you even have fabric. You can start before you have, let me see, what would I say? You can start before you have a seam ripper. You can start before you have tailor's chalk. But anyway, let's not go too deeply into it just yet. So separate and apart from a sewing machine, which is $230, and I'm gonna calculate the Jamaican dollar equivalent for that, just in case there are any Jamaicans on here. By the way, I am Jamaican. I live in Jamaica, and if you're Jamaican, I want you to leave your flag in the comments. Sound off, Jamaican squad. But if you're not in Jamaica, please leave your flag in the comments as well. I just love to know where you guys are watching from. It makes me very excited, and it makes me visualize myself in those countries too. And click like and click share if you're watching this right now. Share it with your friends so that they can watch it too. And if you're watching the live replay, or if you're watching the replay, just hit that subscribe button. So anyway, 230 US dollars is 36,800 Jamaican dollars. And this is gonna sound scary to some of you. Maybe you're thinking, that's a lot of money. But when you think about it, some hobbies just cost a lot more than others. If you're just taking up a painting hobby, it's not going to cost as much as sewing, because you need an entire machine. And like I said, there are options to get those things discounted. Speaking of which, you can use my code. If you go on singer.com, you can get 10% off of your sewing machine, any sewing machine that you choose to get. In fact, Singer has other sewing machines that are more affordable than the 4423, okay? But my Singer code is SEWQUAINT10, SEWQUAINT, then the number 10, and you just put that in at checkout and you get a nice discount. If you're in Jamaica, you can just go to a Singer store. They have sewing machines there, or you could go to Quartz. Quartz sells sewing machines as well. I actually bought my first sewing machine inside Quartz. You can also go to Jamso, and sometimes the fabric stores will have sewing machines on sale, so you want to keep a lookout for that as well. Now let's get into all of the tools that you need in order to start your sewing journey. Because if you have a sewing machine but you have nothing to cut your fabric with, you can't cut your fabric. So you're gonna need things like scissors, a tape measure, pins, a ruler, a pin cushion to catch your pins, or you could use a pin magnet. You will definitely need a seam ripper, definitely tailor's chalk. Unless you're going to be working with patterns, then maybe you won't need tailor's chalk right away. But this list is an exhaustive list, okay? The things on this list are things that I feel like I'm not even going to sugarcoat it with you guys. I feel like you really do need all the things that I'm going to talk about today. If you can't afford some of them, then you could just, like put them to the side until you're able to get them. But in addition to the tools that I listed, you're going to need thread to sew your fabric with. You're going to need fabric, pattern paper if you plan to start pattern drafting. And I feel like if you are sewing and you want to take it seriously, it's important that you get into pattern drafting. But for that, you will need pattern drafting rulers as well as a mat to cut your fabric on and a marker that you can use to label your patterns. As it relates to fabric, you don't have to buy brand new fabric. You could start off with curtains, sheets, clothes that you already have. If you have an item of clothing that you don't like anymore, you could turn it into something else, or you could simply just cut it up in order to be able to get fabric. Sewing isn't as complicated as a lot of people make it seem. A lot of people think that you have to go to the fabric store and buy the most expensive fabric, and that's just not true. And I must say also that how the amount of money that sewing costs you has a lot to do with how far you're willing to go, as well as your sewing style. So if you are sewing home decor items or just home items like bed sheets and curtains and pillowcases, that will be a lot more affordable than if you are sewing avant-garde items. I mean, I'm assuming that you're not sewing avant-garde items as a beginner, but someone who sews avant-garde items that go on Fashion Week runways will have a much more expensive sewing budget than someone who just sews hair bonnets for themselves or their family, or just alters clothes, because you don't even have to sew things from scratch. You could just mend things, you could alter things, and that's where I feel like knowing your sewing style comes in. When you know your sewing style, you're able to properly come up with a list of things that you're gonna buy. And sometimes it's tricky to know your sewing style before you even start sewing, but I have a video on my channel that's titled How to Find Your Sewing Style that will help you to find your sewing style. So basically, you could sew bags, you could sew clothing, you could sew stretchy things, non-stretch things, you could sew home decor, you could just alter, you could upcycle, and that would give you an idea of the type of equipment that you need. Because if you're going to be going into embroidery, for example, which is a very big part of sewing, you would need a different set of tools from someone who doesn't do embroidery. By the way, I haven't really added many embroidery tools on this list because this is pretty much just if you're starting a basic sewing journey. Cool. So I'm gonna go over to my screen right here to just show you guys some of the items that are on this list, right? So like I said, you're gonna be needing scissors. Scissors are very important because without scissors, you can't cut your fabric. And you can't just use any fabric that's in your house. I mean, you can, but you're not going to get the best results. For example, if you have a random paper scissors hanging around, these are my paper scissors, by the way. But if you try to use your paper scissors on your fabric, you're going to have a hard time, especially if you are sewing certain types of fabric. Certain types of fabric interact with the scissors differently. So it's very important that you have two scissors, one for your fabric and one for paper. I will go even as far as saying have a pair of scissors for every different type of material in your home or in your creative space. But when I say different type of material, I mean like paper, then let's say you cut rope a lot, then let's say you cut zippers a lot, then you cut fabric. You can have a separate pair of scissors for each of those things. But this right here is these right here, I should say, are my paper scissors. And then these are my fabric scissors. I have two different scissors for my fabric and my paper. So if you're gonna be getting yourself a pair of scissors, that's gonna run you around $12, as you can see here. And then some paper scissors can easily run you around $9. I remember when I tried to buy items for my sewing journey, because I lived overseas for a time, you see what I'm saying? And I needed to buy new sewing tools, separate and apart from the ones that I have in Jamaica. So I went into Joann's, rest in peace Joann's. I honestly love that store. But I went in there and I bought a set of sewing supplies that I could start with, and my bill came up to 50 something dollars. Whereas in Jamaica, I could easily just go to the fabric store and walk out with fabric plus sewing supplies plus other things for that same amount of money. So when I say this to you right now, I want you to keep in mind that sewing tools and supplies cost a different amount in different countries. So if you live in a country where certain things cost a lot more, then you want to make sure that you budget for that. But if you live in Jamaica, for example, where it costs less, then this list could actually end up coming to a smaller amount for you. A pair of scissors, like I said, will easily run you around $12. And I'm just going to round that off to 13. So these are the scissors that I have in my Amazon storefront. This list basically shows you a bunch of different sewing supplies that you could need for your sewing journey. And if you want the link to this, you can just go to the description box down below, and that will take you to my Amazon storefront where you can get all of these items. These scissors are about $13. If you were to get a pair of all-purpose scissors instead from Fiskars, and Fiskars have some really nice scissors. If you were to get this, that would be about $10. But on my list, I have this $13 one here. And when I say on my list, I mean like on my list of things that I'm going to be calculating for this video. You are going to be needing a tape measure. And as you can see, that's only going to run you about $3.60. But I round that off to like $4. Tape measures are pretty affordable. I am pretty sure I got this one for like $200 and something here in Jamaica. We have like really affordable prices as it relates to fabric, and that's why I created my fabric shopping experience. If you're going to be traveling here and let's say you're staying in the Ocho Rios area or St. Anne or St. Mary, one of the experiences that you're going to be shown on Air Bnb is to fabric shop with me. And if you feel like you want to get to meet me and you want to buy affordable fabrics in Jamaica and you want to be able to ask me questions about different types of fabrics, then this is an experience that you can book. I honestly feel like when you travel, you should try to fill your itinerary with things that are going to benefit you when you go back home. Things that are going to fill your soul and make you feel fulfilled. And if you are a sewing enthusiast, or you just want to be around somebody who will encourage you to sew and make you feel inspired, then that is a great experience for you to have. I have also left that in the description box down below. But pins are another thing that you're going to need. And on the list here, on the sewing machines and supplies list that's on my Amazon, I added this set of pins. Where is it? Pins. You know what? I'm not sure where that went, but that's going to run you about $7.50. I had added this really nice, let me look for it. I'm going to type it in. Pins, metallic pin cushion. This is what I was looking at. This magnetic wrist sewing pin cushion comes with 100 pins. And I feel like this is a very good deal for the price, because not only do you get one of those magnetic wristbands that you can put your pins on, but you also get 100 pins. I have one of them right here. This is from a brand called Texi, and they sell sewing tools and supplies. They're actually in Europe, I believe. But as you can see, all of my pins are sticking to this wristband, and it honestly comes in so handy. I am able to have my pins on my wrists while I work, right? And then I can just take my pins out and do what I need to do. And whenever I'm sewing with my fabric, I will just use this hand to take my pins out, put it on the magnetic thing. And what I like about this is that I don't have to worry about sticking the pin into a specific place, as is the case with pin cushions. And I don't have to worry about my pin cushion falling apart. I have not used a pin cushion in a very long time, ever since I got this magnetic wristband here. Another thing that you could get for your pins is this. This is a magnetic pin container, I guess, or just pin magnet. I'm just gonna call it a pin magnet. What I love about this is how strong the magnet is. Just look. Let's just do a little experiment. I'm gonna drop the pins and they all land on top of the pin thing. I think that's very cool. So get you something that can hold your pins. That's going to be very important, because imagine you're sewing and you're taking out all the pins out of your fabric and you just drop all of them on the surface that you're sewing. That's not very safe. It's not safe, and it's also not good for your mental health. I feel like clutter and things being all over the place is just not good. Sewing in and of itself can already be a, what would I say? Sewing can already be overwhelming for some people. And I feel like as a beginner, it's important to keep your space clear. So when you have somewhere that you can put your pins, that's amazing. Furthermore, when you have your pins on an item like this, or a pin cushion, or even one of those wrist pin cushions that you can just have all your pins on, you are able to take your pins out a lot easier. But when they're just on a flat surface, you're gonna have to, like, you know, try to take it up. Everything is gonna get mixed up, and then next thing you know, yeah, get joke. Anyway, let's keep it moving here. You will also need a ruler. Rulers are important for your sewing journey, because if you're going to be drafting patterns or just overall drawing things, wanting to make sure that you're cutting straight, making sure that your raw edges are straight, you're gonna need a scissors for that. I mean, a ruler for that. And the reason why I picked this ruler in particular, which is $6, is because it has grid lines on it. If your ruler has grid lines on it, it's gonna help you to be more accurate when you're drawing lines. Those grids basically separate the ruler into like 1/4 inch increments, 1/2 inch increments, 1 inch increments, and 2 inch increments. So when you have those, you're going to be able to draw lines a lot easier and measure. And the fact that it's clear makes it even easier for you to draw whatever it is that you're drawing. I find that it just gives you a lot more accuracy. I didn't have one of these rulers when I just started sewing, and I honestly wish that I did, because it would have helped my sewing journey a lot. If you go and get yourself just a regular pair of, not pair, I keep on thinking about scissors clearly, but if you go and get yourself a regular set of scissors, why do I keep saying scissors, guys? Bear with me. If you go and get yourself a regular ruler, I just realized that it wasn't even showing on the screen. Let me just go to it. So this is the ruler that I'm talking about. But if you just go and get yourself a regular ruler, it's going to be harder for you, because those rulers, are basically for mathematical purposes. They're not necessarily for drafting patterns. So you're going to have to be trying to figure out a lot of things like where is the half-inch mark? Where is the quarter-inch mark? Where is the 1-inch mark, 2-inch mark, those kind of things. But if you have a ruler that has a grid on it, you will be able to draw your patterns a lot better. A seam ripper is another very important thing. And I need to refresh this page because I don't know how I'm not seeing a lot of the things that I put on this. Okay, there we go. Here they are. I just needed to refresh the page after all. But yes, you need seam rippers. Seam rippers are so important. If you make a mistake and you need to pull something out, a seam ripper is going to be your best friend. This one is $5, or these. So you get 2 pieces of seam rippers in this pack and it's for $5. I like both of these seam rippers because this one is a lot more, it's a lot easier to hold. Meanwhile, this one is smaller, but sometimes you do need a smaller seam ripper to be able to get into certain places. So that's gonna run you about $5, and then you need an iron. An iron to iron your fabric. It's important that you iron your fabric before you start sewing, whether it's a sheet that you have in your house already, or a curtain, or an item of clothing that you've had for a minute now and you're revamping it or upcycling it or using it to get fabric. You do need to make sure that you iron, because if you don't iron, you're going to be working on wrinkly fabrics, and if you're working on wrinkly fabrics, you're going to end up with an inaccurate cut. If you end up with an inaccurate cut, you're not going to end up with a sewing project that is as neat as possible. And that is one of the mistakes that beginners make in sewing all the time, and it really does hurt your progress. Not majorly, let's be honest. You won't die at all, but it definitely helps to know all the things that need to be done in order to get the best possible turnout. I do encourage people all the time to make mistakes when you just start sewing, because that's how you're going to get better. If you start sewing and you just immediately want to be amazing, you're going to put too much pressure on yourself. But when you tell yourself, you know what, I just at least want to sew 1 line of stitches. I just at least want to turn the sewing machine on. I just at least want to thread it. I just at least want to learn how to cut fabrics or which fabrics to use. That is good to aim for. And once you master a certain aspect of the sewing journey, you can move to the next aspect. Don't ever be in a rush to become a perfect sewist overnight. In fact, it took me a very long time to become good at sewing. Actually, let's not say that. It didn't take me all that long, because once I got guidance on how to actually sew from like more professional people, it was pretty much smooth sailing for me from there. By the way, I have a video on my channel. I'm not sure if I mentioned this already earlier in the video, but I have a video on my channel that talks about how to start your sewing journey. I link that in the description box, so you can check that out to learn how to start your sewing journey. And then I have another video where I talk about how I started my sewing journey. So you can just check out my channel to get that. But let's go back to the list of items that you are going to be needing for your sewing journey and how much it's going to cost you. So like I said, you need an iron, you need a nice sewing machine, and I have a variety of sewing machines on my list on my Amazon storefront here. So if you want to know which sewing machine to get, just check out this list. I recommend every single sewing machine that's on this list. And I have done a review for a few of them. I've done a review for a Singer 6600C and a Singer 4423. I have also shown you how to thread brother sewing machines and industrial sewing machines on my channel. So if you're new here, just take a deep dive into everything that's there and you will find exactly what you need. To start your sewing journey, you also need thread. And I specifically picked these threads because I heard that they're the best quality threads. In Jamaica, I don't really see these threads in Jamaica much. or at least in the fabric stores that I go to. I shop for threads inside Pablo's and Ping's, and I don't see Gutermann threads. I think that's how it's pronounced. But I heard that they are really great quality threads. This pack right here has a variety of colors, and I recommend sticking with these colors on this side that are more, earth tone colors that can go with just about anything. But if you know you're going to be sewing a lot of bright things, then you can go ahead and get a lot of bright threads as well. I'm sure that there are colors on the other side. Oh, here they are. These are all the colors that come inside the pack, but they're really amazing quality thread, and they are quite durable. The type of thread that you use really does matter, because if you use old thread that is low quality, you're going to end up in a position where your threads will pop, or when you stitch a garment, it falls apart, or it just can't really withstand certain level of pressure. So as a beginner, I would recommend getting Gutermann threads if you are wherever that actually sells. And if you're in Jamaica, you can still buy this on Amazon. I don't know how the setup go already. I don't even need to go into all of those details. But the reason why I wanted to use this Amazon list here was to just make it so that you can visualize in your head what the things are going to look like, how much they're going to cost, and whether you're in the Caribbean or you're in America, you can just buy this off of Amazon. I'm not sure. I think somebody told me that Canada doesn't have Amazon. Guys, correct me if I'm wrong. But even if you don't have access to Amazon, you can just go to your nearest fabric store, or whenever you do travel to somewhere that does have these things, you take that opportunity to shop. But these threads are gonna run you around $33, and it's very much worth it. Eventually, you're going to want to upgrade to like cones of thread instead of spools of thread, because these spools of thread can finish very quickly if you're using them a lot, especially the black. The black always finishes first, because you're mostly, well, I'm assuming that you're mostly, I'm talking about me. Like, I mostly sew things with black thread, and then every now and then I'll have like other colors. But I mostly use black thread. As you can see, I have tons of things on my sewing supplies list here, and sewing machines. And these are things that I have mentioned in my videos over the months and years. Things that you could add to your sewing experience and your sewing journey. If you're going to be going deeply into pattern drafting, then you want to get yourself some pattern paper. This right here is going to run you about $29. This is the pattern paper that I currently draft on, and one of the things I like about it is the fact that it actually has all of these numbers and boxes that you can be able to draw a straight line and have like a reference whenever you're pattern drafting. There are 10 yards on this entire roll, and like I said, it's about $30. So you could have called it, so that's like about $3 per yard. However, here in Jamaica, pattern paper is a lot more affordable. I can get pattern paper for like $150 per yard here in Jamaica. That's like half the price, and sometimes for even less than that. But a great hack for pattern paper as well is to just get parchment paper. I'm not sure how much more affordable that is, but if you ever happen to get a package as well that has brown paper on it, just keep that brown paper. Keep that brown paper and draft patterns on it. You could also draft patterns on newspaper, those big ones that open all the way out. You can draft patterns on those, and you can draft patterns on cartridge paper. But then once the patterns start to get really big, you're definitely going to need a roll, like something that's big enough to manage whatever the length is of whatever it is that you're drafting. For example, if you're drafting a pattern for pants, you're gonna need a long piece of pattern paper. But if you're just drafting a pattern for a tiny sling bag, you won't need as much pattern paper. In fact, you could just draft that on letter size paper. This set, actually, I am not even going to go on that because it says that it's not available. Sometimes things that are on Amazon become unavailable after a while and you can't buy them anymore. So I actually need to take that off my list. But here we have some tailor's chalk. If you get this tailor's chalk, it's going to run you around $5. Now, the reason why you need tailor's chalk is because you're going to be marking on your fabric. And when you're marking on your fabric, you don't want to be using marker or pens that are going to leave a permanent mark. You want to draft your patterns with something that's going to be able to wash out. And chalk can wash out. In fact, you can use regular chalk. You don't even need tailor's chalk. The reason why tailor's chalk comes in handy though is because of the shape and size of it. It allows you to get into those grooves, you know, like when you're writing at the side of a ruler, or when you're getting in a corner, or you just want to draw a really thin line. This does a much better job than chalk that you use on a chalkboard. Chalk that you use on a chalkboard tends to be a lot thicker. Okay, so if you want to get something that's a lot more narrow, then you can go for the tailor's chalk. I feel like this is a very good deal. $5 for about 10 pieces of tailor's chalk. This is good because if you drop them, these tailor's chalks are notorious for dropping. And once them drop, them broke, and that's it right there. If you only have one, you're just gonna have to use a piece of the one that you have that got broken. But if you have more than one of them, you can have multiple colors, and on top of that, you are able to replace if it gets broken. Here's a ruler set that you could get. This ruler set is $10, and it's perfect if you are drafting patterns. This has a French curve in it. It has a right angle ruler. It has a bunch of different curved rulers, as well as these gridded rulers down here. I recommend these gridded rulers for pattern drafting because they help a lot. As you can see, this one has a semicircle on it. I've never had to use that before, but I'm sure it comes in handy somehow. And then you also get a variform curve and a triangular ruler with this set, and it's just $10. I'm just gonna close these tabs out. I just realized do I have any cutting boards on this list? I don't have any cutting boards on this list, but you do need a cutting mat. A cutting mat is very important for when you're cutting out your patterns and your fabric. And if you are using a rotary cutter, a cutting mat is definitely needed. Let me just type in here cutting mat. There are lots of different cutting mats that you can choose from. I think that the self-healing ones are really great options, simply because you can use a rotary cutter on it and you don't have to worry about it getting cut. Some cutting mats are paper. So when you try to cut with a rotary cutter, on that cutting mat, it's going to cut the cutting mat. I actually have a paper cutting mat and I can't use a rotary cutter on that. I instead use regular scissors. I'm going to show you guys my cutting mat. This is also from the company that's called Texi. It's purple, and I like the purple a lot. I think that the colors are really cool, and it's self-healing. And then on the back it has circles, and as you can see, it has a grid. Now, the great thing about having a grid on your cutting mat is that you will be able to line up the edges of your fabric with the edges of your cutting mat. And if you're cutting something on the bias, you can use these crossway lines, these diagonal lines. There's also what do you call this? A semicircle down here that basically tells you the degrees or the degree of each of the lines. So you can see them here. This is from Texi, like I said. So if you're in Europe and you want to shop, you know, sewing supplies, then Texi is a great option. That's TEXI. But if you're in the United States, then I would say places like Michael's, Hobby Lobby, Amazon is a great option as well. Or you can go to like independent fabric stores. If you're in Jamaica, then Pablo's, Ping's, that's pretty much it. Those are the biggest fabric stores here in Jamaica. But then you have a few independent ones as well, and those are still great options too. Let me get back to this list. So Fiskars has a self-healing cutting mat, and this one is 24 inches by 36 inches, and it also has those crossway lines that you can use for cutting bias. And then let's look at this one. I'm not familiar with this brand, but as you can see, there are so many different brands that you can choose from with tons of different price ranges. The Fiskars mat is $68. That's how you know that it's a really big mat. That's big. In comparison to this one, that's just $9. It's 18 inches. It's 12 inches high and 18 inches wide. So you really want to make sure that you're checking the sizes of the cutting mats before you even buy them, because sometimes if you don't read the size, you will realize that you buy something that's a lot smaller than what you really need. Marker is the final thing. Actually, no, I'm going to talk about something else after a marker. But markers come in handy, especially if you're going to be doing pattern drafting. Not if, because you definitely need to. You're going to need to label your patterns, right? So a Sharpie marker comes in handy. I will always recommend Sharpie because I feel like Sharpie is a good brand of marker. They tend to be quite, how would you call it now? Saturated, the way that they draw. But any marker works. As long as you can get a marker, just get a marker. In fact, you can draft your patterns with marker if you want. Only thing is that you're not going to be able to erase anything because markers are permanent, or at least Sharpie markers are permanent. So I would recommend that as a beginner, you draft your patterns with pencil so that you can erase it if you have to, and then you can trace it over with a marker. You can use a marker to label your patterns as well, and that will make your patterns stand out even more, especially if you have trouble with seeing fine lines. Now, the final thing that I'm going to talk about is a rotary cutter. I need to actually look that up. I personally don't like rotary cutters. That's just me. But if you feel like you want to get fancy and you want to treat yourself, you can get yourself a nice rotary cutter. And this one is $14.72. Wow. I haven't used this rotary cutter in such a long time that it's actually stiff. And that should show you how much I'm not the biggest fan of rotary cutters. I'm an old-fashioned type of girly though, so I like using scissors. But this rotary cutter works by pressing this down, and I'd like to think that that's how most rotary cutters work. But rotary cutters go hand in hand with cutting mats. If you don't have a cutting mat to use your rotary cutter, you're going to end up cutting the surface that you're cutting on. So if you're cutting on the floor, you're going to leave marks on the floor. If you're cutting on a table, you're going to cut the table. But I have, let me see. At this point, this is show and tell. I'm not necessarily trying to tell you guys to get this. This right here is what I am currently using to cut my fabrics. And this is linked in my Amazon storefront as well if you want to get this. I love this for cutting my fabrics. It cuts multiple layers at once, and it cuts really fast and straight, clean lines. I'm sure I already talked about irons, but this is the iron that I have. It's the Singer Steamcraft iron, and I did a review on it, so you can check that out. And like I said earlier in this video, you can use my code SoapWayne10 to get a discount off of anything that you buy on singer.com. So now let's do the calculation to see how much it actually comes up to in order to start your sewing journey. Now, right off the bat, I actually calculated, you know what, I'm going to go over, right? I'm going to go over each of the items that we spoke about. So let's say you get a sewing machine for $230. Let's say you get a pair of scissors for $13, and then you get a tape measure for $4 and pins that cost $7.50 and come with a magnetic wristband. Let's say that you also buy a seam ripper, the seam ripper set that I showed you, for $5, and chalk for $5. You buy an iron for $50, thread for $33, and by the way, the thread set that I showed you, since it has so many threads in it, I just want to tell you that you don't have to start with that many colors of thread. You could just start with, let's say, 3 colors that you know you're going to be wearing and sewing often, and then you can build your catalog from there. So every time you buy a different color of fabric that you don't have, you will just buy that thread fresh on the spot. So you can always do your subtraction from this entire calculation, but let's just keep imagining here, right? Let's say that you also buy a roll of pattern paper for $29 and a cutting mat for $70 and a marker for $7. Drum roll, please. That's gonna cost you $453 US. There are some things on this list that you don't need. For example, you don't need a cutting mat if you're not going to be sewing, well, if you're not going to be using a rotary cutter. You also don't necessarily need pattern paper if you're going to be starting out with patterns that you buy from other people, as well as patterns that maybe you buy from the store. You don't necessarily need pattern paper for that. And you could always get a sewing machine that costs a lot less than $230. You could get a $150 cost sewing machine. Okay, you can get a sewing machine which costs $100, which costs $80, simply because you buy it from a thrift store or a garage sale. But this right here is 72,560 Jamaican dollars. You can convert this to whatever dollar value it is that you use in your country. So if you're in Trini, if you're in Barbados, if you're in the Bahamas, whatever currency that you use, you can convert that for yourself. Now, when I look at this figure right here, I'm thinking to myself, wow, it kind of is expensive to start sewing. Listen, sewing is not a cheap hobby. Sewing is not a cheap hobby, but the good thing about it is that that's just an initial investment. So once you get those items, you'll have them for a lifetime and you can start sewing. If you're doing a business or you plan to start a business with your sewing machine, over time, that sewing machine can actually make you back all of that money. I feel like it's a wonderful investment because you get to save on buying all the stuff that, let's say for example, you buy clothes a lot, right? And every item of clothing that you buy costs you, I need to make sure I'm doing the math here properly. Let's say that every month you spend $100 on clothing. By the end of the year, you would have spent $1,200 on clothing alone. But if you buy a sewing machine though, you will spend a fraction of that and then you can make your own clothes or modify the clothes that you already have. So if you have a pair of jeans that you don't like, maybe you'd rather to wear it as a pair of shorts, or you want to turn it into a cute crop top or something. There's so many ways that you can transform things that you already have. Then you wouldn't have to spend any extra money on fabric. If your mom has tons of sheets, tons of curtains, tons of things that she doesn't use anymore, or you have a family member that wants to give away some clothes, but you like the fabric on them, but maybe not the clothes itself, or let's say you go to the thrift store and you buy items and you like them, but maybe you don't like the fit per se, you can change that. You can alter, you can mend, you can make things from scratch. Sewing opens a whole new world for you. When you know how to sew, you get to save money. And that's why I always tell people that sewing is a really sustainable way of living, because you're not constantly contributing to the pollution in the fashion industry. You know that fast fashion companies actually contribute very heavily to pollution, and if you sew your own clothes, you get to stop participating in that, and that means that you be changing the world little by little. Sometimes it can be easy to think that, oh well, my little change isn't going to change the world, but trust me, trust and believe that you making a decision like this to make your own clothes is actually a very important thing for the planet. The planet actually needs more people to start sewing their own clothes now. And I realize that a lot of people are getting into sewing, and I absolutely love that for us. I love that for planet Earth, and I will always encourage people to learn how to sew. But that right there is pretty much my list. If you want more sewing videos from me, then you could check out my other videos, check out my other live broadcasts as well, and check out the link in the description box to see all of the things that I mentioned in this video. And I will see you guys next week Sunday. Bye.